Hi everybody, welcome to our webinar on the Cuts campaign that you are fighting in Scotland. I'm Ben Selby, I'm the Assistant General Secretary of our union. I'm joined today by John McKenzie, your Regional Secretary for Scotland, Colin Brown, your Executive Council member, and Matt Wrack, the General Secretary. Firstly, I'd just like to congratulate all Scottish members and officials for this important campaign against the cuts being proposed in Scotland. The Firestorm report is being read across branches in Scotland, but also has made it into corridors of power where politicians are talking about it and challenging your government. Also praise the work you've done in campaigning outside of your parliament in Scotland, but also for sending members down to our national manifesto launch in London recently. I was recently up in Scotland. I attended the Scottish Regional Committee, as well as the all members meeting in the west of Scotland, and it was fantastic to hear the views of members right across that. And one thing I left Scotland with was understanding the anger by which the service is seeking to cut your fire and rescue service. First of all, I'm going to pass over to John McKenzie, your Regional Secretary, who's going to give an overview and background to the cuts that have led up to the summer of 2023. And then I'll invite Colin in to talk about the cuts that are being proposed now and moving forward. So, John, thank you. Over to yourself.
Thank you, Ben. And as we know, as many of our members watching will know, in Scotland, cuts in the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service have been a challenge for a number of years now. They've been a challenge since the service was created in 2013. And since that time, over that 10 years, we've seen really significant cuts. Over 1,200 firefighters' jobs lost in that time across all duty systems: whole-time, retained, flexi-duty officers, volunteers, control. And we've seen control rooms cut. We've moved from 8 control rooms to 3. And we've seen the impact on that on the service we provide the public. We've seen response times increase. We've seen our capacity and resilience for training decrease. And all of that has been a result of funding. In that time, in that 10 years, the service today has £57 million less to spend every year than the equivalent of the 8 legacy services had 10 years ago. And these cuts make huge impacts on our profession. So the background to this has been a long time in the making. We have seen these cuts over a period of time, but they've escalated significantly over the course of the last 6 to 12 months. And Colin can cover what we've seen since that time.
Thanks, John. Yeah, we obviously are aware that this year the thick end of the wedge got driven into in the sense that, as John's covered, we've seen 10 years of cuts and slow erosion of our budget. That's led to a situation where in 2023 the service were in a position where they removed 10 whole-time frontline appliances, removed dedicated water rescue crewing from the Clyde to a Joe crew approach, and implemented their high reach strategy, which was essentially reducing by more than half the high reach vehicles across Scotland. And we very quickly saw the direct impact of those cuts to frontline resources in the Station Hotel Fire and Air, in St Andrews, and in other significant incidents across Scotland that saw response times dramatically increase to these really significant incidents. But the Cuts Leave Scars campaign was always going to be required in direct response to these cuts, but it was always going to morph into a much, much wider campaign to challenge the 10 years of budget cuts that we've seen in the service. We see currently RDS stations across Scotland struggling to retain and recruit. There's currently around about a 30% vacancy rate within our RDS system. There's about a 10% turnover in our RDS, and we need inventive solutions to resolve that. That can't be done on a shoestring budget. We have issues across control rooms that are running below critical crewing levels. That can't be fixed on a shoestring budget because we need to be able to recruit and resource control rooms and our RDS adequately. There are significant problems right across our service. But what have we done about it? So this year we've seen the most significant campaign we've run in Scotland in certainly the decade since the single service was created. As John touched on, we've had significant lobbies. In fact, Ben touched on significant lobbies both in George Square and outside the Scottish Parliament. We launched the Firestorm report. The Firestorm report was a direct result of the voices of members not being heard by politicians within the Scottish Parliament and further. And that report, as Ben's touched on, has been used in Parliament already to question the government, question ministers on why the Scottish Service is in a condition that it is right now, where they're having to be forced to make cuts to frontline appliances. But we've also been front page news across all of the national newspapers in Scotland for 2 days. We've been used on the front pages of local newspapers. We've been on national television. We were the lead bulletin story on the BBC News and STV News, the two main news channels across Scotland. We have been on radio. We have been in local papers. We have been in every single media outlet that we can crack the door open on. We have been in the corridors of power, engaging directly with the leader of the opposition in Scotland, with the Scottish Greens. We've even met with the Scottish Tory leader. We've met with Liberal Democrats, and we have met with members of the SNP government. And most recently, I met with the Cabinet Secretary to discuss the really significant challenges we face in the budget in Scotland. So we have done everything and pulled every political and public lever we can to ensure that the government are in no doubt of the position we are in as a union facing cuts of the magnitude that the boss has described as insurmountable in the sense of capital, but also leading to significant cuts for next year. So this meeting is about briefing members on where we go next, because we still get the impression that government haven't heard us loud enough. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, John and Colin. And something that's important, I think, is that your representatives seek to answer the questions that you've submitted, and some of what Colin said there in terms of setting out where we go next, I think would be answered in relation to those questions. The first one is to you, Colin. If we go on strike, what would the FBU be looking for from the Scottish Government to end that strike?
Yeah, and it's an important question. And there were similar questions if we think back to the campaign on pay last year. There were similar questions. What's the number? What's the number? And this is actually easier to answer than it was during pay, because during pay it was individual to every single member as to what they deemed as an acceptable pay offer. But we know, so on the trajectory that we've got right now between 2022 and 2027, the resource spending review that the Scottish Government announced in May 2022 said there was a requirement for the Scottish Service to cut £36 million from their budget. We saw £11 million stripped out through 2023, and a potential further £14.4 million stripped out next year. So we know that £14 million allows us to stand still, because that's the magnitude of cuts that have been proposed. But we know from Firestorm that standing still is not an option, because Firestorm lays the truth to the situation that every single part of the service is creaking. So an investment of £40 million allows the service to avoid making cuts theoretically. But the service have set out in their submission to the Justice Committee that they require in the region of £60 million in order to modernise stations, in order to modernise appliances, in order to improve their training facility and the capacity, in order to make the changes that broadly the FBU support the service making. And that is not to cut firefighter numbers and appliances from the communities of Scotland.
Okay, thanks, Colin. John, there's a question for you here as well. There's likely to be a general election in 2024. Would it not be better to keep the campaign alive but wait for the outcome of this election?
So, yeah, I mean, there will be a general election in 2024. We don't know when yet, but there absolutely will be. But there are a number of points to this. So Colin touched on earlier, there isn't a politician in Scotland who are not aware of the problems in our industry. And that is down to the work our members have done over the past 12 months, lobbying their MSPs, lobbying and attending rallies outside the Scottish Parliament, and George Square has been touched on, writing to MSPs, creating all the political pressure that we've asked them to over the past 12 months. So be under no illusion, there is not an MSP in Scotland who is unaware of the issues in the fire and rescue service. If they don't listen, if they are not aware of it, it's because they don't want to listen. It isn't because they haven't been told. Now, these issues are with us right now. Colin's touched on next year, the best case scenario. These are the service's own figures. The best case scenario with a flat cash budget would be that service would need to save £14 million. The worst case scenario for them is that could be anywhere up to £26 million. The Chief Officer is on record giving evidence to the Scottish Government in what £14 million of savings next year would translate to. it would be the loss of 339 firefighter jobs and 18 further appliances if it was applied across the whole time. There is no guarantee of where it will be applied. It's likely it will be applied across all our duty systems because of the scale of cuts being forced upon the service. So there isn't a politician who's unaware of the impact of these cuts, both that have happened already and that will happen. It's been laid out in many ways by the employer, but certainly far more vocally by the union, and particularly by our members. And these cuts will be with us. The threat of these cuts will be with us. They're with us now, and for next year they will be with us on the 1st of April. We don't have time to wait for a general election. We don't have time to wait until these cuts are made, because as we all know, and as we've already seen over recent years, fighting to return numbers, firefighters and stations back on the run is much more challenging than maintaining them where they are.
Thanks, John, but I'm going to stay with you just for a moment because I know there are a lot of retained firefighters in Scotland, and the questions come in saying retained firefighters are doing standbys at other retained stations, which has a huge impact on their personal lives and their primary employment. What's the plan for RDS, John?
So it's a really important question. The RDS are a massive part of the fire service in Scotland and in the union in Scotland. They make up half of the frontline operational workforce, and they're absolutely pivotal for providing cover to about 85% of the country geographically. Many of our most remote and rural local communities rely exclusively on RDS retained firefighters and FBU members to keep them safe. So it's a huge part of the challenges that we have ahead. And the Firestorm report really clearly lays out. The Firestorm report, as we've touched on, I'm sure you will all have seen it already. The Firestorm report lays out in bare the concerns and challenges our members see, the FBU members, the firefighters across Scotland have seen over recent years. And many of those who took part and responded retained members. And there are significant challenges. We've seen that as a result of funding. We've seen it as a result of funding since 2013. Retained terms and conditions are still to be harmonised 10 years on from the creation of a single service. A position that must be absolutely unacceptable to all of us. And again, absolutely rooted in a lack of funding, a lack of investment to be able to bring standards up. And we know that there's challenges, significant challenges within the retained duty system. We see about a 10% turnover of retained staff because we can't recruit and then retain. The service can't recruit and then retain these staff. And these challenges are driven by costs, earnings, and associated other challenges with the retained duty system. And we're seeing more challenges, as has been touched on by the question. So standbys to other stations, both whole-time and retained, to provide cover for other appliances that are unavailable, either through issues in regard to staffing or resourcing. These are taking people away from their own local areas that they serve and undermining resilience across the country. And we're just seeing a spiralling decline of the service that is provided to the public. And again, it's rooted in underinvestment, lack of funding and cuts. So the Firestorm report lays out really clearly the demands of the FBU, and there are demands of the FBU for the retained duty system, for all of our members across all duty systems. But what we want to see from the Scottish Government is a vision. We want to see them listening to the concerns that we have all, and you have all made very clear, and we want to see a vision from them for the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, a vision for them, for you and your futures, and what you're able to provide.
Thanks, John. Colin, I'll turn to you for this question. Can we tie this campaign together with the pay campaign that will likely be needed in 2024?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've seen over the course of this year how the Scottish Government responded to this campaign. The press releases from Scottish Government have been consistently attempting to conflate the £14.4 million they increased our budget by, and that was specifically to meet the demands of the pay rise, so that the Scottish Service didn't have to make even further cuts this year. So the answer from Scottish Government this year has been to attempt to say that the cuts imposed on the service are a direct response to Scottish firefighters demanding a fair pay rise and receiving a fair pay rise through collective bargaining and negotiation. So if we then may try to make the argument that the underfunding, the chronic underfunding of 10 years in the Scottish Service would be resolved by giving firefighters a pay rise, we're kidding ourselves on. And I don't mean that to be derogatory in any sense, but we need to be very clear that firefighters' pay and the ability for the service to be sustainable and safe and protect communities are not directly linked. The equipment, the infrastructure, the capital resource, that needs to be very, very clearly set aside from firefighters' pay. So it would be a mistake for us at this stage to try and join these two campaigns, because they are very separate, and it would give government an easy way out to say, as they've attempted to do, like I say, over the course of this year, that firefighter pay is the cause of the resource spending review being so negative for the Scottish Service.
Thanks, Colin. And just whilst we stay on the subject of potential industrial action, one member has sent in, I agree that we may need to go on strike, but I'm really concerned how I'm going to make ends meet, especially if the strike goes on for a long time. What do you say to them, Colin?
We saw it last year. You know, we were in the most sustained campaign over pay last year that this union's seen, and certainly as any Scottish member, it's 20 years, over 20 years now, since Scottish members took industrial action. Because of adjustments that were made over pensions, Scottish members avoided an industrial action that our comrades across the rest of the UK took in 2012-13. So there absolutely is a situation where the Scottish Government may take the position that they would rather see firefighters out on strike, and we will have to be in a position where we respond to that. It is never a good position for us to be in, that we are asking members to go on strike. The strongest mandate that we have is to be willing to take strike action, and for government to realise that the anger that's been expressed by our members is legitimate. It is not just myself and John McKenzie and our lead national negotiators making noise for the sake of making noise. It is genuine anger from members on the back of appliances and in stations. So, the answer to that is that we need to make sure that the mandate is as strong as possible, and that every member shows that unity and stands together and holds the government to account for their actions in underfunding the service.
Thanks, Colin. John, why do you think we have to do this hard work? Why aren't the service making the case?
It's a question that's been asked numerous times in the branch and mass meetings that we've done over the last 6 months, Ben, or has certainly come up regularly. Look, I just to touch on the end of Colin's question there on a couple of points, and then I'll come on to that. Never be fooled in responses from politicians and saying that in some way, shape or form, workers' wages are linked to other cuts in their industry. We've had 10 years of cuts in the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. In that time, until our our successful pay campaign last year, firefighters had lost £4,000 in real term earnings, 1,200 jobs had been lost, and £57 million had been stripped out of the budget. All three things were true together. Firefighters still took a pay cut, and they still cut our profession. They still cut our numbers. So never be fooled by that speak from politicians. And let's be honest, what we're talking about here is we're talking about a fight for the future of our service. We're talking about a fight for the future of what our industry looks like and the level of service we can provide the public, firefighter safety and public safety. That's why it's so important to firefighters. That's why it's so important for firefighters to stand up to this. Now, in the question in terms of positioning of the service, I think one of the key things that I would direct members towards are some of the submissions the service has put in to the Scottish Government, and the service will take responsibility for their own statements to government, and that's a matter for themselves. But to be really clear, the numbers that are on record in regard to the cuts projected for next year aren't just ours. They're the services cuts. The Chief Fire Officer, giving evidence to the Scottish Criminal Justice Committee in their pre-budget scrutiny sessions, outlined that the level of cuts so far outlined by the Scottish Government in terms of funding would see, and I've said it already, almost 340 firefighter jobs cut next year in 18 appliances. That's the services projections. And it is up to politicians to listen to that. And the final point I would say within that, and this is something I think it's important for us all to recognise, and we have recent memory of this, in major issues in our industry, right across the board, when at times to step up to the plate, it is the Fire Brigades Union and firefighters who do so. We've seen that with our pensions campaign. It wasn't politicians, it wasn't Fire and Rescue Services, it was this union. We've seen it with the decom campaign, when it's members such as yourselves, money from your own pockets, your own membership fees that have paid in large part for the research that has underpinned some of the changes that we're looking to see in our industry. And when it came to pay campaign, we've heard many statements in regard to falling firefighter pay over recent years. But ultimately it was firefighters, FBU members, standing up and saying enough was enough, and they weren't willing to accept it, that saw a settlement in regard to pay and a change from an initial offer of 2% to a settlement of 7% and 5%. So when sometimes when services and politicians are found wanting, it's firefighters, it's the FBU that stands up and get results. Now, the Scottish Government had an opportunity, we've covered this already, No MSP in Scotland is unaware of the challenges in our service. The Scottish Government are not unaware of the challenges in our service. They have the opportunity to show that they've been listening. The draft budget announcement for the Scottish Government is on the 19th of December this year. Our expectation is that they listen and they address the challenges that we've outlined to them. But should they fail to do so, we have to be prepared as a union and as members to make our voices heard. And that is part of the purpose of why it's so important that we are organised, united, in order to fight back against these cuts and make it clear to politicians that we won't accept this. We will fight for the future of our service and we'll make sure it's a future for those that come after us.
Well said, John. John, I'm just going to stay with you for a moment. There are two similar questions here. I'm going to put them both to you. First of all, the Scottish Government has spoken before of wanting FRS to modernise. What is the FBU's position on things like role expansion? And then a question that's come in this evening is, would the Scottish Government be minded to increase the budget of Scottish Fire and Rescue if we were to get role expansion back on the agenda?
So again, two questions that are not unfamiliar to us, and members of Scotland will be aware of some developments over recent years in regard to pay, but I want to be really clear on it. Since for almost 8 years now, role expansion has been conference policy at the Fire Brigades Union. It's been the Fire Brigades Union that has been making the progressive pay for modernisation of the Fire and Rescue Service. But it's not modernisation based on cuts, it's modernisation based on investment. It's modernisation based upon addressing the issues, the cuts, the challenges within our service, growing it and providing a better service to the public. So role expansion has been conference policy for this union for a number of years now. It's been part of a national conversation. It's been part of a conversation in Scotland over recent years as well. And members were aware that we were updated to an all-member Scotland circular in September of last year that outlined the position we had reached with the employer. And without covering ground that wasn't already covered in that, I think it is important to touch on it anyway. We had productive discussions with the employer last year in addressing the challenges and the reasons for the rejection of the 2019-2020 pay proposal on role expansion. It was a recommendation made by this union, both at the EC, both at the regional committee, and delivered upon by FBU members. We were completely united in that position. And to the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service's credit, the discussions that we had last year recognised the reason for that rejection. They listened to the reasons for that rejection and they sought to address them. Now, the position that we reached is ultimately that we came to an agreement in principle. I want to be really clear on this, an agreement in principle that was absolutely backed upon investment from the Scottish Government. It is the Scottish Government that has asked for role expansion. Role expansion are part of the key aims of their own Fire and Rescue Service document for Scotland, a publicly available document. And the union employer came to a position where they agreed on the principle of what that work would look like. But what we were absolutely clear on is we will not accept a position of job cuts for a pay rise. We will not accept the loss of firefighter jobs to fund a pay rise. And it was something the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service recognised. So in order to deliver it, it is absolutely built upon the premise that the Scottish Government must have. So the Scottish Government asked to see development in areas of role expansion. They have the opportunity to fund that and have it delivered for them. And again, this Firestorm report and the lobbying that FBU members have done over recent years has made the case explicitly clear to them. None of this is a secret to them. They are aware of this. And again, it is another area where the Scottish Government have the opportunity on the 19th of December to show that they have been listening. And that is ultimately a key part of this campaign as well. But ultimately what this campaign is about funding. It's about investing in the Fire and Rescue Service. It's about investing in firefighters. And that covers covering our issues within our retained duty system, the recruitment and retention issues. It covers the exceptional workloads that flexi duty officers are finding themselves in, and many, many members working hours that they are not being paid for over the courses of a week. It covers whole-time pumps sitting unavailable, uncrewed in stations, despite 10 pumps already this year being removed from the run. It covers critical staffing, falling below critical staffing levels in control rooms, because we have reached such a point where our staffing levels that we cannot staff them in a way that even satisfies critical levels. Think what that says. Think if we fall below critical, what that means. So it's about investment right across the service, and it is absolutely pivotal that the Scottish Government listen and show they're listening on the 19th of December.
Thanks, John. Coming towards the back end of the questions, I know there'll be lots of questions that unfortunately can't be answered in this short call, but there's an important question, I think, Colin. It was certainly a common theme during my visit to Scotland recently, and the question asks, some managers are saying that even with investment, these pumps aren't coming back on the run, but the chair of the board said they're actively looking to make that happen. What is the truth?
The truth has to be that in the current situation and the current lack of funding, where the chief, as John set out, is already saying that next year they're looking to make cuts of a further 18 whole-time appliances, how can they possibly look to bring back the 10 they've removed? I think it's double speak of the worst example. So there is currently no plan that has been set out to us in Scotland or anywhere else as to how they would look to bring those pumps back. Now, there may be a will to do so. They have said that this will go back to public consultation, and certainly the level of public engagement in our campaigns and the petitions that were run locally in the 10 areas that saw pumps removed, the public do not want these pumps removed from their community fire stations. So I don't know how that circle gets squared. There is a case, and we have to be willing to have grown-up conversations that, you know, some of these pumps are not particularly active, but the firefitters absolutely are. The 166 firefighter posts removed from Scotland this year, we would rather see them, if there's a justifiable cause for it, put into training departments to ensure that the firefighters that are out on the back of pumps are trained and safe and competent in their roles. And currently, as Firestorm sets out, that is not the case in every part of Scotland. So there are conversations to have, but the service to date have set out no plan as to how they will bring these pumps back. Just to touch on a couple of points around that, you know, that there are conversations that I'm aware some managers are having in some of the more remote areas of Scotland, saying none of this affects us, we're all right here. There are areas of duty systems where the cuts don't directly impact those members. But the reality is that 10 years of cuts and underinvestment impact every single firefighter in Scotland. We have a situation where the service are attempting to compress the BA course because they recognise they can't deliver that across the 357 workplaces in Scotland and the thousands of firefighters that protect Scotland. So essentially, the training is being diluted, compromising every firefighter's safety potentially at operational instance. We have flexi officers who are having to manage control rooms that are running critical levels, increasing their stress and work levels exponentially. We have, as John's touched on, flexi officers working far in excess of their contracted hours, and there's no recompense for that, essentially driving down their hourly pay and putting immense pressure on them to cover all bases with fewer and fewer resources. RDS, as John's also outlined, are sitting with vacancy rates at 30% and a churn of staff of around about 10% across Scotland every single year. So we are never getting on top of this problem. And RDS firefighters, the commitment that's given by those that are still working the RDS system across Scotland and protecting the local communities is getting stretched thinner and thinner, and their support is getting less and less because we are removing whole-time resources that would be the natural backup for some of these RDS stations. So everything is creaking. So as I touched on at the very, very start, the immediacy of the Cuts Leave Scars campaign to challenge the removal of those direct resources, those 10 pumps in Scotland in September, it is not about that specifically. It is about the decade of cuts that has impacted every single firefighter in every single workplace in Scotland.
Thanks, Colin. John, I'll turn to you with the last question, if that's okay. And it's, is there any consideration to remove goodwill out of role map activity? And perhaps as you conclude, you can tell members how they can get in touch with any further questions they may have after the call.
Yeah, so look, we're carrying out a consultation with members. The 11th October, the Scottish Regional Committee agreed to begin a consultation with members in regards to potential industrial action. That has been ongoing and will continue to be ongoing over the weeks ahead. And these are the discussions that we're having within these meetings. But I think one of the really important things when we're considering what industrial action looks like, and we've got to be really clear, these are decisions ultimately the Executive Council and the Scottish Regional Committee will make. So we'll not, certainly not going to bypass that. But we have to be really conscious of the action that was successful in achieving our aims last year. It is all FBU members standing shoulder to shoulder, taking action together, showing their displeasure at what is happening to their service, showing their anger at what is happening to their service. And the reality is this affects us all. We've covered already that this affects all duty systems. It affects all workplaces. it affects stations all across Scotland's geography. And so there really is a feeling that we should stand together and that any action we take should replicate that of last year. But those are decisions that both the Executive Council and the Scottish Regional Committee make, and all options will be considered. And that is absolutely a part of that process. I would encourage members to attend their branch meetings, attend mass meetings, have that input, because ultimately it's through our branches that we make these decisions, we decide our strategies, and it will be the view of members that will dictate that. Now, just very quickly on a second point, just to cover on one of the questions I've seen come in, a very quick touch on in terms of role expansion being kicked. Role expansion would be something we would consider if the budget wasn't satisfactory. I would repeat the point that I made earlier. We've been clear with the employer and we've been clear with the Scottish Government that any role expansion and associated increase in pay will not be paid for by firefighter jobs. That has been an explicit condition that both the Executive Council and the Scottish Regional Committee have been clear on throughout. So the message to the Scottish Government is clear. If you want to change the role of firefighters, if you want to have discussions about modernise the service, it is a discussion based on investment. It is not a discussion based on cuts, and we couldn't be any clearer about that.
Thanks, John. And look, that wraps up the questions for now, but I'll invite Matt, the General Secretary, now to say a few words.
Okay, thanks, Ben, and thanks, Colin and John, for that great input. And I'll say out some points. I will try and answer one of the questions on the screen as well during that. Look, for me, the main thing I wanted to do is, first of all, congratulate Scottish FBU for getting so many people onto the webinar. That's really great to see. But also for me, I've been up to the big rallies at the Parliament and in Glasgow, and it's been fantastic to see, inspiring, frankly, to see the numbers of FBU members from across Scotland who've turned out to say that they're going to stand up to defend our profession and our service in Scotland. It's absolutely inspiring. And I want to sort of give a warning to people of what happens if we don't fight, because I've seen, unfortunately, cuts all over the UK Fire and Rescue Service on a scale we've not seen before in history, and unfortunately it is now starting to hit the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. And it's hit us in many ways, in terms of pay, in pensions, job losses, attacks on terms and conditions, so that the job is being undermined bit by bit in terms of the service we deliver to the public, our own safety, and our ability to do that job professionally. I think Colin very well earlier set out how the wide awareness there is in Scotland, and I've been up there when there's been this the coverage in the Scottish media and the Scottish press about some of the major incidents that you'll all be aware of, and how cuts have already been obviously impacting on the ability of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service to respond to fires and other incidents that local communities have got every right to expect a decent, prompt and professional response to. We know from the Firestorm report, actually your own views on the concerns members on the front line of the service have about the direction that the service is heading in. And I want to be absolutely clear that the entire Fire Brigade Union stands with the Fire Brigade Union in Scotland and Scottish members in this campaign. You will have every ounce of support that we can give in terms of campaign material, physical support, political support, industrial support, and so on. And it has been fantastic to see the scale of support as we've built it up. And I think we need to remind ourselves that it's only ever been the FBU who's stood up consistently to defend the Fire and Rescue Service and to defend the role of firefighters and to seek to improve genuinely the role of firefighters. And this term modernisation is much abused, frankly, because unfortunately often it is used to mean cuts and downgrading of things and dressed up as modernisation. We're in favour of genuine modernisation, of looking at the risks that our communities face in the future. But to address those risks properly, then we need investments into the Fire and Rescue Service, including the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. Just in terms of one of the questions there from Thomas on the if we take industrial action, will we be bound by thresholds set out by the UK government. Look, there are various bits of legislation governing industrial action. Some of it does apply in Scotland. Some of it is not yet clear how it applies in Scotland. So the last big act, the 2016 Trade Union Act, which introduced new thresholds in ballot rules, that does apply in Scotland. The most recent one, which is the Minimum Service Level Act, which will require unions, workers who vote for a strike effectively to break their own strikes. It is not yet published in terms of the regulations, how they will apply to fire and rescue. But what we do know in the ambulance services, that does not apply in Scotland. That's been left to the Scottish government, and separately to be left to the Welsh government. So it seems possible, or probably, or more likely that those minimum service levels may not apply in Scotland. But to be honest, we don't know fully the answer to that at this stage, but we'll monitor that and keep people informed. And my final point is this, Ben, that if you look back to the pay campaign that both John and Colin have mentioned, we started out with our employers across the UK offering us 2%. And we were told pretty bluntly, there is nothing else coming. There's no chance of shifting them. And we took that campaign on. We then got offered 5%. And again, some people thought we could get no further. The union voted, our members voted to reject that, and we continued with our campaign. We balloted for strike action, but we're not rushing into a strike. We want to avoid strikes. We want to avoid industrial action if we possibly can. And in the end, we were able to do that. We did that because of the unity that members were able to demonstrate all across the Fire Brigade Union. The Scottish Committee of the Union has recommended a ballot for strike action. We're well aware of the seriousness of that question that we are asking people to think about. But that's the question we are asking branches to meet and discuss, and you to think about in your own considerations. But that campaign did shift the employers. We eventually got to the offer 7% and 5%, which shifted them from 2%. That, to be honest, is the most recent example we've got of how it is possible to move people who tell you at the start that they're not going to move. You've got everything to play for in this campaign. You've run a fantastic campaign so far, but we're still at early stages of what needs to be done. So well done for everyone for attending, and to your officials, as I say, you have the full support of the entire FBU.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks, John, Colin, and the rest of the regional committee as well for what you've done here in relation to this campaign. No member in Scotland should be in any doubt that you don't have the support of the Fire Brigade Union right across our entire union. Please continue to organise, continue to meet, stand together. Thank you, and solidarity.